my last session on loneliness, but I'm going to do the same here and share 3 very quick disclaimers before we dive in. The first one is that this talk is called What We Get Wrong About Minimalism, but it's not going to be a takedown or an attempt to bash minimalism. Much more, it's an attempt to redefine and maybe display minimalism in a more nuanced way. So not a takedown, more a promotion, actually. The second thing is that normally I'm like a writer and I have all this time to think about the sentences I'm about to say and edit them and delete them. And here it's all freestyle. So please bear with me if I have a stutter or any technical difficulties. Speaking of which, I'm assuming you can. I see a question that they're not getting audio. Is anyone else not hearing my audio? There was a, okay, good. Last session there was, I had this problem where the Q&A didn't refresh. And I think the same is here, so it's all a bit messy, but we're gonna make the most of it. Anyway, the third disclaimer is that yes, please do ask questions and make comments during the talk. I'll try to only talk about like 15 minutes. I don't want to make this where I just overwhelm you with all the information, but yeah, hopefully we can have a discussion or a conversation at the end. Again, I hope I'll be able to refresh the questions, but yeah, let's dive in. So today I want to share with you 3 things in particular we get wrong about minimalism. And perhaps to get on the same page, I want to clarify what I mean by minimalism throughout this talk. So what kind of minimalism we get wrong, because minimalism has taken on so many meanings and it's gotten very, very difficult to say what this word is actually about. So I think the minimalism we've gotten wrong is the type of minimalism that is discussed in books like this. This is Goodbye Things by Fumio Sasaki, and he defines minimalism as, and I'll quote here, reducing our necessary items to a minimum and doing away with excess so we can focus on the things that are truly important to us. And so what we see here is a very object-focused minimalism, and it's very much the notion that less is more, and we should bear it down to the bare bones and to the essentials, as they always say. And to understand why I disagree with this notion, some personal history. So I got into minimalism out of necessity. There was a time in my life where I moved up to 3 times a year, often abroad, and during every move, I just felt this overwhelming feeling and emotion of like weight and being slowed down. And so originally, this notion of reducing things very much resonated with me, and I followed this path for multiple years, tried to, declutter and tidy and purge wherever necessary. And sort of my peak minimalism moment was when I moved to Portugal with only a backpack and stayed there for roughly 10 months. But by the time I left, I didn't have any clue how long this is gonna take. So I had it really reduced to the essentials, and the author of this book would certainly be proud. But then slowly it started creeping up on me, and I wondered if this is really what minimalism is all about. And that brings us to the first thing we get wrong about this type of minimalism, which is that less is more. I think less isn't always more. So what do I mean by this? I think that when we treat minimalism as a quest to really own as little as possible, and like treat it as this sort of reversed arms race to own less, then we can very quickly slip into a compulsion or competition to declutter, and we start counting our things, and we have this urge to always reduce, less. But in all this frenzy, we really stop asking, why did we start this in the first place? And that's sort of what happened to me during the winter in Portugal, where it can get very, very cold, at least much colder than I expected. And I remember I just felt way too cold with the stuff that I brought. So I clearly had to buy warm stuff. But then I felt guilty about buying warm socks. And I really wasn't sure if this was the right decision, even though that is really an essential. So there's sort of this cognitive dissonance between, well, less, but also essentials. And it just gets very confusing. Or another example, I used to paint as a hobby only for a few months. And then I stopped painting. And then I thought, well, I can declutter all my paint stuff now because I stopped doing it for quite some time now. And then a few months after that, I rediscovered my joy for painting. And I was like, oh, it would be cool to have some painting stuff now. But I had already decluttered everything. So that's where that's where minimalism just made me consume more, because I was so focused on reducing and decluttering, that it really was paradoxical. And this leads us to the second thing we get wrong about minimalism, which is that minimalism is sort of this path to salvation or betterment in a consumerist and capitalist society. And to some degree, it can be an antidote to this overwhelm of consumption. But we have to be careful with this, because minimalism can very quickly turn into this promise, like you just need to declutter, like you just need to go through this step-by-step process and go from maximalist to minimalist, and then at last your life will be complete. So there's still this barrier you need to cross to get like where you want, instead of just accepting that perhaps life as it isn't that bad. And I mean, this is also displayed in the book, and a lot of other content on minimalism is this transformation you see, right? Maximalist, life bad, all chaos, and then minimalism, and everything is fine. And of course, I'm joking here a bit, but that was really how it was for me, because I had followed this procedure, and yet I didn't get the results that I signed up for. And I remember recently I rewatched the Minimalists documentary, and there was one of the protagonists who sort of painted his life, how it changed after minimalism. And he remembers, like, before minimalism, I had all this stuff, I had all this money, but I still wasn't happy. And I don't want, like, certainly that's not wrong, but I think the other way around it can also happen. Like, I was thinking to myself, well, I got rid of all my stuff and I don't have all these possessions, and I'm still like not feeling great. Like I still have all these problems, and like ultimately a minimalist life is still a life with all the worries and anxieties and relationship problems. So yes, it might be able to help and focus on what's important, but we must not buy into this idea that it's the silver bullet. And the third thing we get wrong about minimalism, at least mainstream minimalism, is that it's sort of this that minimalism is in fact simple and minimal. And this might sound a bit confusing, but let me try to explain. So very often what minimalism actually is, at least the mainstream minimalism, is an illusion. For example, one of the most minimalist products is the phone, at least to a common definition about minimalism, which is that minimalist products are very slim, very functional, like all in one. But what's actually behind this phone is so much more. It just cloaks all the excess behind it. Like this phone actually takes advantage of a maximalist ecosystem, right? So most phones are produced under morbid working conditions, often not really considering the environmental damage. And of course, it's supported by a network of satellite armies and communication devices and all these things. So it seems minimalist, but actually it's just a disguise it's just a representation of a much bigger thing. And another illusion that can happen if we follow this mainstream minimalism is that we can develop an illusion of control, which is that when you declutter and tidy and bear it down to the essentials, you get a great sense of accomplishment. Like you actually get a feeling of making a difference, and it can feel like you have everything in your life under control, right? Like you have everything your own and everything is in its place. But this, in the larger scheme, is actually an illusion, because that's only what happens inside your apartment. Outside, life is often, or almost always, uncertain, ambiguous, just random and unexpected. And no matter the amount of the things you own is going to change that, or the tidiness of your bedroom, right? So it actually creates this sort of barrier to the world, where we find ourselves safe in our sanitized environment, but stop asking like what's beyond it. And it doesn't really prepare us for what life actually is. So I said it in the beginning, I don't want this to be a takedown. I still very much resonate with the idea of minimalism, and that it can be a helpful tool to navigate modern life. But I actually want to share one thing that I deem to be much closer to the true essence of minimalism, of like minimalism as a philosophy and not just as an aesthetic. And that's the Japanese concept of mono no aware. And this is a concept that dates back to medieval ages, and it's been around for centuries. And what it basically means in Japanese is the pathos of things, or the sorrow of objects. And more loosely, this means sort of the beauty of things passing. So essentially what mono no aware is an awareness that everything in life must pass, and that we actually don't have control over things. So, and that because everything in life has this impermanence and this transience, that's what makes things beautiful in the first place. Like that's what makes them meaningful. If we were immortal, like our lives, we would never get around to doing anything, and that's basically what I find to be much more minimalist, meaning that it's not about controlling your possessions, like caging them in. It's more about the realization that you never really had control in the first place. That it's much more about letting go and to stop clinging to any ideas, including minimalist ideas. So if you just take one thing away from this, I would say that a more nuanced version or definition of minimalism would be that the world is not a series of products to be consumed, and this includes minimalist products. Much more, minimalism is a way to experience life, a realization that life is a moment-to-moment experience, and that we don't really have control, no matter what we do with our possessions. I hope this has been helpful for you. I'll try to see if we have some questions. I hope they're loading this time, because last time I wasn't as successful. Oh, this is a great question. It's from Azia. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they're asking, I would like to ask, what is your view on slow fashion? Is this also a form of minimalist behavior? I think it depends. So I think in the past few years, we've seen a great commodification of minimalism, where everything suddenly became minimalist. Like a white shirt became minimalist, a design became minimalist, a interior became minimalist. And at the same time, like there has been this huge uprising of coaches and gurus and like content mills of minimalism. And yes, I do realize I contribute to this content mill to some degree. But what this has actually shown us is that minimalism itself has turned into a product, and that minimalism to survive in the world that we live in, it needs to adopt marketing strategies, and that's how it often betrays what it actually vouches, like what it actually vouched to destroy. So I would say if slow fashion can be in fact minimalist if it is actually if it is not minimalist washed, if that makes sense, right? So if it's actually slow fashion, and beyond that, if you have attention to it, and if you don't treat this item of slow fashion, whatever it is, as a promise to make you happier or better, then I think yes, it can be very much a form of minimalist behavior. And I hope that answers the question. I don't know. I'm checking if we have more coming in. Oh, Carmen asks, how to start, where to start. My husband is not on board with this idea. Yeah, that's totally normal. I think it's certainly minimalism to some degree is a revolution, and it's a way of non-conforming to things. But I would suggest, based on my understanding of minimalism, is to explore what it means to be minimalist as a philosophy, and to explore, to make the inner change first before you make the external change first. And what I mean by this is that very often, at least from my experience, I got rid of stuff before, although I was still like really clinging to them. And this meant that I wasn't ready. And I'm not sure if you're at which point you're at, but I think one thing I wish I would have done on my minimalist journey is to really get behind the ethics and not just the aesthetics of minimalism. So really, concepts like mono no aware, where like you really start practicing this impermanence with objects. And I think minimalism doesn't always have to start with a decluttering project. Like I think it's quite the opposite. I think it just can start with first the attention and the intention to consume and move around in the world. So I would say, if your husband is not on board with the idea of minimalism, just try to start from within and try to start them to make the changes that are in your reach, and then see how your husband responds to it. I think by no means minimalism should ever be something that we force onto other people. So it should, the thought has always come from the people themselves. Hope that makes sense. Okay, I'm seeing a few more questions. We have 7 more minutes left. Here I see another question from Anonymous, asking what the most painful thing was I ever let go. Let me think. I think one of them was a souvenir collection that I had built up over my childhood, and that represented a feeling of being lucky and having gotten this chance to travel to many countries at a young age. But the reason, and I think this is like very important to always remember, that like the reason I got rid of it was because it was stuck in a basement box, and I hadn't looked at it for years. Like I hadn't put the objects on display, and I stopped really having a relationship with them. And that was the reason I decided to let them go. But again, it's like it was still painful because the past was sort of connected with that. But I think the one realization that really helped me when figuring this out was that they were, for years, they were just in this basement box, and I wasn't really paying attention to them. And actually, the one act of letting these things go and seeing them as an impermanent part of my life, that really, like this one act made them so much more meaningful. Because if they're just in a basement box, I just think, oh yeah, they're always there and I can always return to them. But this one act of letting go is so much more powerful, because it's like, sentimentally speaking, it's like almost as if you say goodbye to an old friend, and you remember this goodbye forever. And this act makes the things much more meaningful than keeping them in a box where you really don't have a relationship with them, or appreciate them. Let's see, I'm going to check for more questions. Okay, let's see. One question from Andre. And he says, my example about the painting supplies resonated because he is at that decision point now too. So what is my thought process on when deciding what to keep or what to donate or discard? Great question. I think with my at the point that I'm currently at, I think minimalism isn't about decluttering anymore in the first place. Like, I think it's more about grasping the relationship. And I know I keep repeating this, and it sounds maybe kind of obscure, but it's really when I want to decide what I want to keep or what I want to donate or discard, I really ask myself what this item is currently doing to me. And it doesn't always, like, the mainstream minimalism always says this guideline of it has to be essential or add value, but like there can also be times when items don't add value to life, and then you rediscover that they add value. So I think there is a huge serenity and power to just sit on decisions to let go. Of course, it's a different subject if you like really need the space and you drown in stuff. But if you're not in an urgent situation, I recommend sitting on stuff and then asking yourself what this object has meant to you in the past, how if you might need it again in the future, and if someone else would find greater joy with this object than you currently do. So I think when you answer the latter question with yes, I think it makes great sense to donate the item. And because even then, if you have to buy a new one, I don't know, ideally secondhand, depending on the item, you know that the old item is in better hands than it would have been at that time you discarded it. I hope that answers your question. Okay, and I see we're almost at the end. It's almost 11 a.m. Eastern time. So I would like to thank you all for coming and listening to me. In the first comment I put in the chat, you can find all my articles on minimalism. And this has just been like scratching on the surface. And again, it was a lot of freestyle. So I don't know if I could really communicate these ideas effectively, but if there's anything unclear, or if you would like to read more about this, I can recommend checking out my list on minimalism on Medium, where I collected all my articles. And I also have another session here at Medium Day at 11:30 Eastern time, so in 30 minutes. It's going to be about pen names and the question if you should write under a pen name. So a bit different topic, and it's also about the story how I switched from a pen name to my real name. So if you're interested in that, feel free to join me at 11:30 Eastern time. Otherwise, thank you again for coming, and see you in the next one.